Hello, Namaskar. This is Firstpost and you're watching Vantage with me, Palki Sharma. We begin with campus protests in the US. The pictures are as dramatic as American hypocrisy. Police in riot gear is cracking down on students. There are violent raids on campuses, and the authorities and media are talking about everything from a foreign hand to nuanced understanding of the problem, which is all very well. The thing is, they don't use the same playbook when it comes to student protests in other countries. Meanwhile, the Japanese currency is in crisis. What is Tokyo doing to save the yen? Will the International Criminal Court arrest Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu? Why does the shadow of Putin loom large over the European election? What happened at schools in Delhi today? 100 of them received a bomb threat. What is Australia's new plan to help women trapped in violent relationships? Why are cities in Saudi Arabia flooded? Why is the split in India's Godrej family making headlines? What's happening in the Sudan, where famine-hit people are eating soil and leaves? And how countries are struggling to deal with over-tourism while they also want visitors to boost their economies. All this and more coming up. The headlines first. Hamas wants the Gaza ceasefire to be permanent. The group is set to respond to Israel's truce proposal soon. The 40-day ceasefire offer calls for exchange of Israeli hostages for a large number of Palestinian prisoners. But Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said the truce will not stop him from sending troops into Rafah. Turkish police clash with protesters in Istanbul, detaining over 200 demonstrators. Authorities had banned May Day rallies at the historic Taksim Square. More than 40,000 police were deployed across the city. Since 2013, protests have been banned at the Taksim Square. Representatives of 18 political parties from 10 countries arrive in India. The ruling BJP had invited them to observe the general election. The representatives meet India's External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar and the BJP president. No invitation was sent to any political party from Pakistan or China. One of the strictest abortion bans in the US comes into effect in Florida. The new law bans abortions after 6 weeks of pregnancy, replacing a 15-week ban. President Joe Biden calls it a quote-unquote nightmare. Florida is one of the most populous states in the US. And Ukraine unveils its first AI-generated spokesperson. The AI model, called Victoria, will be the foreign ministry spokesperson. The statements read by the model would be written by people and not generated by AI. Kiev says the move will save resources and time of its diplomats.
This is the New York City Police Department. You have been warned as per City College to leave the campus. If you refuse to leave, you may be placed under arrest. I'm moving. This is the New York City Police Department. You have been warned as per City College to leave the campus. If you refuse to leave, you may be placed under arrest.
Cops in full riot gear, late-night brawls, and students dragged out in handcuffs. That's America for you. Colleges there look like a battleground, especially Columbia University. Yesterday, we told you what the students were up to. They'd occupied an important building, Hamilton Hall. So late on Tuesday, the cops arrived, and not your ordinary beat cops. We're talking about military-style officers with shields, batons, smoke bombs, and helmets. Basically in full riot gear. Their mission was to retake the occupied hall. Take a look. We shall not be moved.
This is the New York City Police Department. You have been warned as per City College to leave the campus. If you refuse to leave, you may be placed under arrest. Leave. I'm moving.
Let's call it what it was, a violent police raid. And look at the aftermath. Broken doors, shattered glasses and chairs all over the place. Imagine if this happened elsewhere. The US response would have been very different. Moral lectures, stinging editorials, maybe even sanctions. But we haven't seen any of that. Instead, the US media is hiding behind neutrality. Look at this New York Times op-ed. It says, colleges have gone off the deep end. Same with the Wall Street Journal. It says divestment from Israel will not work. Now, to give you some context, that's what the students are protesting for. Complete divestment from Israel, but the journal says it won't work. And do not get us wrong, these articles do make a lot of sense. They give a nuanced analysis of the student protests. But the problem is, we don't see it elsewhere. When students in Delhi protest, there is no nuance. It is innocent students versus evil government. When students in Moscow protest, same thing. It's anti-war student versus evil Putin. But in New York, it's none of that. Let me show you some more pictures from Tuesday, this time from the University of California. We saw two groups of protesters there, pro-Palestine and pro-Israel. And pretty soon, things got heated.
Let's go! We're not like them!
And let's be clear, this has gone beyond healthy debate. This is now hooliganism. It is violence for the sake of it. I'm sure many students strongly believe in their cause, but a lot of them don't. As Gen Z would say, they're protesting for the kicks. Just listen to these students.
What would you say is the main goal with tonight's protest?
I think the goal is just showing our support for Palestine and demanding that NYU stops. I honestly don't know all of what NYU's doing.
Is there something that NYU's doing?
I really don't know. I'm pretty sure they're... Do you know what NYU's doing? About what? About Israel. Why are we protesting here?
Palestine will be free!
I wish I was more educated. I'm not either.
Oh.
I came from Colombia.
Maybe these students are a minority, maybe they are not. The fact is, we can't be sure. But guess who New York authorities are blaming? External actors, people who don't belong to these colleges. Again, look at the hypocrisy. When protests break out in Asia or Africa, every protester is a student. There are no activists, no politicians, and no foreign plotters. But in New York, there are outside actors. How convenient. Back to the students now. Many of them had locked themselves inside Columbia's Hamilton Hall, so the college shut off the gates, sort of like a blockade. The hope was that the students would leave when they ran out of food and water. Again, wrong guess. Listen to this student negotiator's appeal.
Do you want students to die of dehydration and starvation or get severely ill, even if they disagree with you? If the answer is no, then you should allow basic, it's crazy to say because we're on an Ivy League campus, but this is like basic humanitarian aid we're asking for. Like, could people please have a glass of water?
Well, where do we start? She says the students need humanitarian aid. I'm sorry to say they don't. A McDonald's takeaway is not aid. What people in Gaza need, that is aid. Dozens have died trying to get their hands on a food packet. You can't compare that situation to this. And all of this makes one thing quite clear. The protests have gone off track. It started off with some genuine demands like a ceasefire in Gaza, but now it's all performative anger. We are seeing all sorts of random slogans and chants. Like at the University of California, somehow the pro-Palestine protesters took aim at India, maybe because of New Delhi's close ties with Israel. So a pro-Israel protester chimed in and he began chanting, Jai Shri Ram.
Jai Shri Ram! 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 Jai Shri Ram!
No relevance, no logic, just protesting and chanting for the sake of it. But here's the problem. These students are not backing down. Suspensions have not deterred them. Police raids are not stopping them. So what will? It's a huge worry for Joe Biden. These students are largely left-leaning liberals. They're part of Biden's voting coalition. If they abandon him, it will hurt the president. Plus, the pictures are not a good look. Biden took charge back in 2021. America was deeply divided then. It was gripped by two violent movements, the pro-Trump Capitol riots and the Black Lives Matter movement. So Joe Biden campaigned on returning to normalcy. Yet 3 years later, look at the scenes in the US. Cops raiding campuses, students marching outside college in violent midnight brawls. This looks nothing like normalcy. So Donald Trump is latching onto it. He's comparing the college protests to the Capitol riots.
And Charlottesville is peanuts compared to what you're looking at now. This whole country is up in arms, breaking into colleges, knocking the hell out of Columbia University. I mean, they took over. I know the building very well. They took over a building. That is a big deal. And I wonder if what's going to happen to them will be anything comparable to what happened to J6, because they're doing a lot of destruction, a lot of damages.
Trump won't mind these protests, but Biden will be worried. The students may or may not be leading a genuine campaign, but the perception is set. America is divided under Joe Biden. He needs to get a grip on the narrative here. If not, this college unrest could cost him. Now let's talk about the Japanese yen. It is going through a rough time. Its value against the US dollar has declined sharply in the last 3 years. The yen has lost over a third of its value. And on Monday, it dropped further. $1 was worth around 160 yen. This was the Japanese currency's weakest position since 1990. So what is happening to the yen? If Japan is the world's fourth largest economy, an economic powerhouse, why is its currency so weak? The reason is the United States, more specifically, the interest rates in America. Take a look at some numbers. What is America's interest rate? Anywhere between 5.25 to 5.5%. What about Japan? Less than 1%. In fact, 0.1% to be precise. That's the rate in Japan. Now think from the point of view of an investor. If you had a large sum of money, say $1 million to invest, where would you take your money? Would you take it to the US, where you'll earn over 5% in interest? Or would you go to Japan, where the return is next to nothing? The choice should be clear. The US offers superior returns, so that's where the money is going. Investors are selling their yen-denominated investments and buying bonds with US dollars. So effectively, this is a swap. The yen for the dollar. And this is why the Japanese currency is losing value, because investors are dumping it. So what is Tokyo doing about it? It is trying to defend the yen.
The extreme and abnormal fluctuation caused by speculation and its negative impact on the national economy cannot be overlooked. Therefore, we would like to continue to take appropriate actions when necessary.
Tokyo is being cagey with the details, but Japan's central bank did make an intervention this week. It is called the Bank of Japan. It dipped into its reserves and bought large amounts of yen. The specifics have not been made public, but the yen has shown some recovery. Today, the price of $1 was around 157 Japanese yen. So the Bank of Japan may need to keep fighting, although it rarely intervenes to protect the yen. Do you know when was the last time they stepped in? Back in 2022. That's when Japan spent $60 billion to defend the yen. The bank's first intervention in 25 years, 2022. And what was the price of the yen back then? 146 against the US dollar. Today, even after the central bank's intervention, the yen is much weaker, and in the days ahead, its value may decline further.
If underlying inflation moves in line with our forecasts, we could adjust the degree of monetary easing. But we think easy financial conditions will be maintained for the time being.
That was Japan's central bank chief. He was talking about interest rates, and he plans to keep them unchanged, below 1% for the foreseeable future. So investors have every reason to rethink, to look for options beyond Japan. That's the first potential fallout. And how will this affect the people of Japan? Their imports will become more expensive. Tokyo's biggest imports are crude, natural gas, and integrated circuits. If the yen weakens further, all these imports will become more expensive. But there's also a flip side to this. For some people, a weaker yen could be beneficial. Like the exporters of Japan, they will earn more by sending the same amount of goods overseas. Also, tourists stand to gain. If you've been meaning to visit Japan, this is the best time, especially if you're American or just anyone really carrying American dollars to Japan. You'll get more out of your money. But overall, the signs are not looking good. In March this year, Japan narrowly avoided a recession, though there is still a feeling of economic distress there. Look at this headline. Japan has 9 million empty homes. And why is that? Because there are no buyers. Apparently, foreigners are now showing interest. They want to invest in these properties, which brings us to another question. Is it time for Japan to think about a shift, perhaps allow more foreigners into the country? Considering the current state of affairs, it won't be a bad idea to consider. Now let's talk about another crisis, the crisis that Israel's Prime Minister finds himself in. Benjamin Netanyahu is facing heat from all sides. From the people of Israel, from his own government, from the US, and even from the International Criminal Court. Everywhere he turns, the daggers are out. His options are limited. On the domestic front, he is choosing to defy the people of Israel. They've accused him of failing the hostages. Hamas captured more than 250 Israelis and took them into Gaza. This was during the October 7th attack. About 130 hostages have not been returned. Some have died during the fighting. But about 100 are still with Hamas. Their families obviously want them returned, and they blame Netanyahu for failing to do this.
Families of the hostages, we are gathered to call upon the cabinet members, get out of government if you can't secure a hostage deal now.
Hands painted red are a common sign in Israel now. Protests against the Prime Minister keep taking place regularly. Over half of Israel's population wants him to resign immediately. About 58% of those polled, they want him to resign. 28% of the people who voted for Netanyahu during the election also want him to step down, which means he has lost over a quarter of his supporters. If he resigns, he may never get another shot. This could be his last stint as Prime Minister of Israel, so he's doing everything he can to prolong this term, even bowing down to his coalition partners. You see, Netanyahu did not win the 2022 election outright. The parliament in Israel has 120 seats, the Knesset, 120 seats, and the Prime Minister's Likud party has only 32 of these seats. He is in power because of a coalition government, a coalition that includes people like this.
If you decide to raise a white flag and cancel the order to occupy Rafah immediately, in order to complete the task of destroying Hamas and to restore security to the residents of the South and to the citizens of Israel, and to return all our abducted brothers and sisters to their homes, the government headed by you will have no right to exist.
That's Bezalel Smotrich. He's one of Netanyahu's coalition partners. He's threatening to oust the Prime Minister if he does not attack the city of Rafah. That's the last refuge for Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. Another hardline coalition partner is Itamar Ben-Gvir. He put up this reminder on Sunday. It roughly translates to an irresponsible deal equals to the government's dissolution. He's talking about the ongoing hostage negotiations with Hamas, the deal that protesting citizens want Netanyahu to take, but his cabinet colleagues want him to reject. So the Prime Minister is caught between the devil and the deep blue sea. He cannot be forced to resign, but his coalition can dissolve the government, which is why Netanyahu has declared that he will invade Rafah. Regardless of a ceasefire deal, he will invade. He's choosing to stay in power despite the will of the Israeli people. He's willing to destroy the last city still standing in Gaza to appease his hardline coalition. But by doing this, he risks angering Israel's biggest foreign backer, the United States of America. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is in Israel. He met the Prime Minister today. The U.S. has drawn a red line around Rafah. It wants a concrete plan to keep civilians safe. Until that happens, it won't support any Israeli operation there. But will Netanyahu listen? At a time when he needs more help from the US because he faces another external problem. The International Criminal Court. The ICC is a court based in the Netherlands, in The Hague. It investigates genocides, crimes against humanity and war crimes, and it has issued an arrest warrant against Russian President Vladimir Putin in the past. That was last year. Now, the same ICC plans to do this with Netanyahu, issue an arrest warrant.
You have to hear this to believe this. The International Criminal Court in The Hague is contemplating issuing arrest warrants against senior Israeli government and military officials as war criminals. This would be an outrage of historic proportions.
The warrants may come as soon as this week. What does this actually mean? Will the court arrest Netanyahu? Will they haul him to the Netherlands in chains? Well, that won't happen. The ICC does not have a police force to do that. And Israel, like Russia, does not recognize the International Criminal Court. So Israel is under no obligation to arrest Netanyahu for the ICC, even if there's an arrest warrant against him. That's the case in Israel and all the other countries that do not recognize this court. But 124 countries in the world do recognize this court, and they will have to arrest Netanyahu if he ever visits, which means the Israeli Prime Minister's movements will become limited. He will only be safe if he avoids most countries in the world. If the ICC issues the warrant, it will be a major inconvenience for him, and more than that, really, it will be a statement that Netanyahu's actions in Gaza are similar to Putin's actions in Ukraine. That won't be a good look, and it explains Netanyahu's outburst.
Israel expects the leaders of the free world to stand firmly against the ICC outrageous assault on Israel's inherent right of self-defense. We expect them to use all the means at their disposal to stop this dangerous move.
He's talking about the US here. He wants Washington to help him, and they are doing so. The US does not recognize the ICC either, and they don't support its case against Netanyahu. So Washington is behind him, at least for now, at least until he toes the American line. As you can see, Netanyahu is surrounded. He's facing opposition from every side. One wrong move, and it could be over for him. Let's see how he navigates through this mess. Netanyahu's biggest rival is not Hamas, it's probably elections. And that's where Europe is heading, towards a continent-wide general election. It happens every 5 years. This one is scheduled for early next month. Citizens of the European Union will vote for MEPs. That's members of European Parliament, MEPs. And these MEPs are very powerful. They approve the EU budget, they debate new policies, and they elect the EU Commission President. So there is a lot at stake. Now, every election has some burning issues like inflation or jobs. But in the EU Parliament, it's more ideological. You have different political camps, the far right, the centrists, the socialists, the moderates, and so on. Polls say that the far right could make significant gains this time. So EU President Ursula von der Leyen is firefighting. She's calling the far right Putin's proxies.
When I see what your AfD colleagues, the lead candidates, have done. They are under investigation for being in the pocket of Putin. And if you look at the electoral program, you will see that it echoes the lies and the propaganda of the Kremlin. So clean up your house before you criticize us.
Two factors to note here. One, Putin looms large over these elections. His war in Ukraine is a key campaign issue, and there's a reason why. Traditionally, the EU has been controlled by two groups, the centrists and the socialists, and they oppose Putin's war in Ukraine. They also advocate more aid for Kiev. So the current EU policy was designed by them. But the far right says, forget that. Taking on Putin is costing Europe, energy prices are higher, inflation is higher, and money is being burnt on military aid. So the far right says, reduce support for Ukraine. Maybe even reset things with Putin. Hence von der Leyen's criticism. Which brings us to the second factor. The far right is making inroads. These parties are expected to finish first in 9 EU nations, including in France, Austria, and Poland. They could also finish second or third in 9 countries. So the dynamics are clearly changing. By June, the EU Parliament could look very different. Centrists and socialists out, a right-wing coalition in. And Putin knows that. He's tightening the screws on European companies. Many of them have subsidiaries in Russia, so Moscow is taking them over. 2 such instances have been reported. One by an Italian water heating company and the second by a German appliance maker. Both of them had local wings in Russia. But last week, Vladimir Putin signed an executive order. He put both these subsidiaries under Russian control. Now, Germany and Italy have protested this. They say Russia's move is illegal. But frankly, we've moved past that. Europe has frozen Russian assets parked abroad, so Moscow says this is just retaliation. You freeze our assets, we take over yours. And where does that leave Europe? In a bit of a spot. If anti-Ukraine parties come to power, it could be game over. We've seen indications of that. Last year, Slovakia elected a new government. A right-wing populist became the prime minister there, and he ended military aid to Ukraine. Imagine this happening across Europe. It could cripple Ukraine's war effort, which is why European centrists are worried. We saw that desperation last week. When French President Emmanuel Macron gave an alarmist speech, he warned that Europe could die. But von der Leyen is choosing a different path. She can't work with the far right, but she's looking at less radical options, like Giorgia Meloni of Italy. She leads a right-wing party, but she also supports Ukraine. Meloni is part of a coalition in the EU. It's called the ECR, the European Conservatives and Reformists. And von der Leyen was asked if she would work with the ECR. Listen to her response.
The question was, are you open to cooperation with ECR in the next mandate?
It depends very much on how the composition of the parliament is and who is in what group.
So she's open to it. But either way, one thing is clear. This is going to be a very consequential election for Ukraine, for Putin, and for the future of Europe. The idea of EU was to build unity and consensus. Will that idea survive if EU skeptics control Brussels? We'll find out next month. Let's turn our attention to India now. This morning, schools in and around Delhi were in panic. They received a bomb threat. Just when students were getting settled for their first class of the day, close to 100 schools got an email. It said there were explosives on campus. Within minutes, emergency teams were deployed. Everyone on the premises was evacuated. After searching every nook and corner, the investigators found nothing. It turned out the bomb threat was a hoax. There were no bombs on any school campus. But this episode raises serious concerns. Just an email was enough to spark chaos across 100 schools in India's capital. Do school campuses in India need better security? How should they deal with such threats in the future? And who was behind this one? Our next report has more.
The email was unlike any typical message you would get. It was crafted to intimidate everyone who would read it. In this case, around 100 schools in and around New Delhi. The origins of the email remain untraceable. The sender's email address seems Russian, but the threat was unequivocal. Written plainly in the second line of the email, there are many explosive devices in the school. The panic was widespread. Schools in all corners of India's national capital got the mail. The parents had to rush back moments after they dropped their children. One of the schools even had exams scheduled, but everything had to be stopped. Within hours, bomb disposal units and sniffer dogs replaced teachers and students inside the school premises. They conducted a thorough sweep. There were no bombs or explosives inside any of the campuses. Later, India's Home Ministry declared that the threat was a hoax. All the emails were traced back to the same Russian source. The email address doesn't reveal the identity of its sender, so it's possible that the sender may not be Russian at all. The email could have just been routed through a Russian internet connection. The anti-terror cell of the Delhi police will investigate the case. They'll have to do some digging to find the culprit. But today's incident should keep everyone on their toes, from parents to teachers and even the authorities. All the chaos today was caused by just an email. What should schools do if they face a similar situation again? Are they equipped to handle such threats? What should parents do when an alert is sounded? What role should the teachers play? And how can the students be prepared to manage such stressful situations? Last year, parents in Bengaluru were asking similar questions. Bengaluru is the capital of the southern state of Karnataka. It's considered India's IT hub. On the 1st of December, several schools in Bengaluru got bomb threats on email. They were also a hoax. The email went out to close to 70 schools. Just like today, the students were evacuated safely. The threat was traced back to Cyprus. The local police looked for the sender for weeks. In December alone, this report declared the probe had hit a dead end. And in February, it happened again. This time, just one school in Bengaluru got the email. It was sent to the school's principal. Again, the threat was fake. Parents in Bengaluru are calling for enhanced safety measures in schools. They have raised demands for a dedicated policy which can legally guarantee the safety of children in schools. Today's events in New Delhi only highlight the urgent need for a comprehensive review of safety measures in schools.
For our next story, let's start with some numbers. 1 in every 3 women is subjected to violence by a partner. 1 in 4 experiences domestic violence before the age of 50. 38% of all murders of women are committed by their partners. It tells you a lot, doesn't it? Violence against women is not new or unique to a country. It happens everywhere, mostly at the hands of a close partner. And it can be physical, sexual, or emotional, which brings us to the question, why do these women not leave? Why can't they just ditch their abusive partners or families? The answer is money or the lack of it. Most of these women do not have the financial independence to do this. They may want to walk out, but what will they do after that? How will they support themselves and, in a lot of cases, their children? Australia is coming up with an answer. The government has pledged almost $1 billion to help victims of domestic violence, to help them leave violent relationships. It's called the Leaving Violence Program. The plan includes a one-time payment of around $5,000. This money is for basic support, access to referral services, risk assessments and safety planning. The survivor will be eligible for up to $1,500 in cash. The rest of the money will be goods and services for 12 weeks. But that's not all. The legislation includes more measures like laws to ban deepfake pornography, funding to protect children from pornography, and anti-doxing laws. But the focus is on leaving violence. And this is not the first time Australia is trying this. It trialled this program in 2021 with around 45,000 participants. It did not work out though. Over half of the participants said so. They said accessing the payment was difficult and the eligibility criteria was too complex. So the government has now come up with a new version. It will have its own issues, but it may be a step in the right direction, something that other governments can take note from. Because domestic violence is a global problem. In the US, it results in over 2 million injuries every year. In Denmark, 1/3 of the women have experienced partner violence at least once in their lifetime. In India, nearly 30% of married women are said to have faced domestic violence. These are all staggering numbers. Yet most countries often turn a blind eye. Some offer legal support, others are trying financial support. In most cases, it barely scratches the surface. What societies need are innovative solutions, like women-run services. I'll tell you why. Violence against women often is not reported or goes underreported because women fear that there will be a backlash or that they won't be taken seriously. So introducing women in the system helps. It is helping in India. Women are more likely to report crimes at all female police stations. Then there are code words. Pharmacies in the UK had them, like Ask for Annie. If a woman came in and said that, it meant that she was looking for help. In France, they have free hotel rooms for domestic violence survivors. The government would pay for 20,000 hotel night stays. Chicago, too, partnered with Airbnb to offer free home rentals to survivors. These are just some examples. Gender violence, we understand, is a very complex issue. There is no one-size-fits-all solution. Governments are trying everything. It's important to have the right program, yes, but it's more important to ensure effective implementation. Without that, these are just headlines and statistics. A household name in India is splitting. I'm talking about Godrej. It's a 127-year-old company and a true Indian success story. You name it, they do it. From soaps to home appliances to real estate, Godrej is everywhere in India, but now the company is splitting. The family has arrived at a deal. They will divide the assets between two camps. The first is Adi and Nadir Godrej. The two brothers will keep Godrej Industries, which means they get the 5 listed companies. Their cousins are the second camp, Jamshed and Smitha. They will keep Godrej Enterprises Group. Now, this includes a lot of unlisted businesses like furniture, software and defense. Plus, they will get prime real estate in Mumbai. That's around 3,400 acres of land. It has a development potential of 1 lakh crore rupees. From all accounts, this is an amicable split, no bad blood, no differences of opinion. Let me quote the family's statement. The realignment has been arrived at in a respectful and mindful way to maintain harmony and to better align ownership in acknowledgement of the differing visions of the Godrej family members. Other business leaders are praising them. Uday Kotak said the family has high integrity and quality. He said this deal will help the next generation flourish. Harsh Goenka also chimed in. He said the deal was as clean as Godrej soaps. But why all the noise? Isn't planning for the future routine business? Well, yes, it is. But you must consider a few things. The first is legacy. Godrej was established in 1897. It was rooted in India's Swadeshi movement. So the brand has a lot of significance, not to mention a lot of money. The group has around 1.2 billion consumers. Their listed companies are worth 2.4 trillion rupees, which is around $28 billion. Out of this, the family owns around 18 billion. So money and legacy was at stake, which is why a clean split was necessary. It will reduce the scope of conflicts within the business. It will also reassure shareholders, sort of like a win-win, which brings us to the second factor, the Indian business culture. A lot of big Indian companies are run by families. We don't see that in the West, but it's pretty common in Asian societies like in India, Japan and South Korea. So corporate succession becomes even more complicated here, because extra variables are at play like personal equations, family tensions and even old rivalries. But the Godrej family seems to have avoided it. They've given a sneak peek into the next generation of leaders perhaps, again within the family. Jamshed Godrej is bringing his niece on board. That's 42-year-old Nairika Holkar. Meanwhile, Adi Godrej is grooming his son Piroj Shah. He is 43 years old and will take over as chairman in 2026. So the family is locked in, although they're not the first to do this. Business splits always make a splash in India. The most talked about one was in 2005. That's when the Reliance Group split. Its founder, Dhirubhai Ambani, did not leave a will, so his two sons had to figure out the succession. Another example is Ranbaxy, India's first multinational pharma company. Its founder, Mohan Singh, split his holdings into three, one each for his three sons. But the matter escalated. There were legal cases and boardroom battles. Eventually, the father was ousted from the company and its board. A third example is Bajaj. Rahul Bajaj and his brother Shishir fought in 2002. Again, the issue was control. Both sides filed legal cases, slandered each other in the media and created separate camps. A settlement was finally reached in 2008. Rahul Bajaj's camp gave up its stake in two subsidiaries and Shishir Bajaj gave up 2% of his stake in Bajaj Auto. Thus, the dispute was settled. These are some of the important examples. There are many more in Indian corporate history. In the past, these splits were bitter. They created a lot of uncertainty for customers, for workers and for shareholders. But experience could be key here. Corporate governance has improved a lot. So has the focus on professionalism. So maybe the next generation of splits will be less controversial. Our next story is from Sudan, the other country facing a civil war. With all the attention given to Gaza and Ukraine, the world sometimes forgets about the Sudan, about the war that's been raging on there for over a year, about the 49 million people there, a third of whom face food insecurity. About 5 million of them are on the brink of famine. Disturbing reports have been coming in about people eating whatever they can find to survive, from cats to tree leaves, even soil from the ground. Here's our report.
The children were collecting tree leaves and eating them. They took mango leaves and ate them. My cousins walked next to the school and collected the tree leaves, cooked them and ate them because we didn't know if we would have food for breakfast.
There were people in the neighborhood who ate the cats. Either you die from hunger or find a way.
Mango leaves boiled into a broth. Cats. Sometimes even soil. Moist soil rolled into a ball, swallowed with some water. These are some of the things people have been eating in Sudan. They are doing everything they can to survive as the country stands on the brink of famine. The people of Sudan are caught in the middle of a civil war. On the one side is a military junta. On the other side, a paramilitary group called the Rapid Support Forces. But it looks like neither side is supporting anyone but themselves. The RSF has looted aid shipments. They sell the food aid in the open market, charging exorbitant prices. The Sudanese army is no better.
Sudan has production that is more than it needs, and this is reassuring. This is clear evidence and answer to everyone who's defaming and saying there will be a famine in Sudan. There's no famine in Sudan.
They want the world to believe that everything is fine in Sudan. Never mind the thousands of people dead or millions on the brink of starvation. The junta claims to have it all under control, but the common people relay tales of their hunger. The charity Doctors Without Borders says that a child is dying every 2 hours due to malnutrition. The United Nations says 18 million people in Sudan are facing food insecurity. The world knows how serious the situation is and who is to blame.
Right now, 5 million people in Sudan are on the brink of famine, and tens of millions of people are in desperate need of aid. And yet the warring parties continue to obstruct humanitarian access and aid.
But despite knowing this, it seems the world has no solutions, and things are about to get worse. The month of May is here. It signals the beginning of the lean season, the season between harvests. Food will be in short supply from May to September. This heightens the risk of starvation in Sudan. A report by a Netherlands-based think tank paints a grim picture. It has put out 3 scenarios. It says the best case is that 6% of Sudan's population will face catastrophic hunger. The worst case, 40%. The world needs to do more to prevent this. 20 million people cannot be left to starve. Their plight cannot be ignored, and their conflict cannot remain a forgotten war.
To many, Japan is for the bucket list. Roaming the rainforests, eating tempura in Tokyo, picnicking under cherry blossoms, and finally getting that Mount Fuji money shot. This iconic shot features 2 things: a convenience store in the foreground, which are ubiquitous in the country, and Japan's most famous landmark rising from behind, Mount Fuji. This is Japan's highest mountain, and this shot is very Japanese, so to say. It's a visual juxtaposition. It shows 2 things with a completely contrasting effect. So this view has become incredibly popular. Tourists travel for hours to get a picture here, but that's not all that they do. Some of them climb onto roofs of other houses and shops there. Some park vehicles illegally and haphazardly, all in a rush to get that perfect snap. For years, officials have repeated warnings, they've put up road signs, but matters have not improved. Now residents are at their wits' end.
Tourists begin to gather to take photos as early as 4 a.m. or 5 a.m. and they can be loud. The locals are struggling just to walk on their own streets. I never thought it would be like this.
Kawaguchiko town is built on tourism. I think the town itself welcomes visitors, as long as they behave in a manner that is respectful. But there are a number of things about manners that are a little worrying.
Tired of rowdy tourists, Japan is putting up walls. Quite literally, authorities are constructing a big black barrier. It will be erected to obscure the view. The barrier will be 8 feet tall and about 66 feet long. That's the same length as a cricket pitch. And with this, Japan hopes it can overcome over-tourism, meaning too many visitors at a particular destination. Japan is witnessing a tourism boom. It is breaking records. 33 million people are expected to visit this year. And for the first time ever, Japan saw more than 3 million tourists in the month of March. What's behind this boom? Post-pandemic travel restrictions are over and the government is pushing to attract visitors because more tourism means more money. But not everyone is happy. This year, tourism will break records globally. It will add $11.1 trillion to the economy. That is the projection. More than $11 trillion. Before the pandemic ruined travel for the world, 2019 held the record. It saw a high of $10 trillion. This year will surpass that. at more than 11. At the local level, 142 countries will exceed their 2019 tourism performance. So local economies will get stimulated. Think hotels, tours, transportation, they will all gain from the direct spending. Also look at the indirect spending. The ripple effect. Hotels will buy sheets, towels or groceries. Tourists will splurge on trinkets or experiences. Globally, 1 in 10 people are employed in jobs that relate to tourism. So from local vendors to big players, everyone benefits. But if something sounds too good to be true, it probably is. Because over-tourism also means overcrowding, more traffic, infrastructure limitations, soaring housing costs, pollution, even broken 150-year-old statues. It's a long, long list and a tricky problem. Countries want tourists, but not too many. So they're battling over-tourism with over-the-top solutions. We are only 4 months into 2024, but these are some of the headlines from across the world. Apart from putting up a wall, Japan has banned tourists from visiting parts of Kyoto. Venice has started charging day trippers. Milan is considering a ban on pizza and ice cream at night. Amsterdam has banned construction of new hotels. Paris has increased tourist tax by 200%. Hawaii is thinking about charging a hefty tourist fee, and Capri has doubled its visitors' fee. Who can blame them? This Mediterranean island sees 16,000 tourists every day. Its population is 12,900, 16,000 tourists every day. So you get the gist. Some countries hate tourists to the point that they're willing to spit in your beer. But at the risk of receiving hate mail, we want to clarify one thing. We don't want to dissuade you from travel. Traveling is not wrong, but doing it irresponsibly is. Travel is not just about the hot vacation spots or that one Instagram-worthy picture from that one location. Traveling is also about expanding horizons, choosing quality over quantity, and following sustainable practices. So where can and should you go this year? To make it easier for you, we've compiled a list. Here are the countries crumbling under over-tourism. If you visit them, be mindful of how you spend your time. Additionally, these countries are reportedly not friendly to tourists. So think carefully before planning a trip. Even if you ignore both the lists, many destinations still remain. Because my point is simple. If you look beyond what Instagram and TikTok say, you have a lot of options. Choose wisely. And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. In Paris, tear gas was thrown on the streets during the May Day march. In South Africa, hundreds of baby sea turtles were rescued after a rare storm. And the Olympic flame is sailing across the Mediterranean Sea to France for the Summer Games. Finally, we're taking you back in history. On this day in 1889, May Day was first observed as a labor holiday. The origin is linked to the international labor movement, especially the movement for 8-hour work days. Today, it is celebrated across the world to mark the achievement of workers. We're leaving you on that note. Thanks for watching. We will see you tomorrow.
Allez, Henri.
First things first, this war could end this afternoon. Just for two things need to happen. Okay, Hamas need to lay down their arms, needs to put down their weapons, and they need to let our hostages free. They need to let our 133 people free. 36 of them, unfortunately, we know they've already killed, but these are our people. They've been in Hamas's terror dungeons for more than 202 days now, and these people need to be brought home right now. So, we don't want to go into Rafah. The reason that we have made the decision to go into Rafah is because we know that we've destroyed 3/4 of Hamas, 18 or 19 of their battalions. We know that 4 or 5 battalions remain in Rafah, which means that we must put out the last parts of the fire in Gaza. If we do not, as Benny Gantz, our minister in the war cabinet, has made very clear, you cannot put out 80% of this genocidal terrorist army and leave 20% of it still standing, because that 20% will retake Gaza, and they will attack us again. And the reason I say that to you, Daesh, is because every time Hamas is interviewed, they simply say the same thing. They say that we want to do the October 7th massacre again and again and again. And we just cannot let that happen. So we have no choice. We have to destroy the last vestiges of Hamas. But it's important to realize that we need to get innocent Gazans out of harm's way first. We'll always do that. That's what we've done in the last 202 days. We get people out of harm's way, unaffected people. We keep them out of harm's way, but we are going for the last 4 battalions of Hamas in Rafah. Not one of these hostages, not once in the last 202 days have these hostages received a visit from the Red Cross. So, this is a war crime which is happening every single day. We've got, the truth is we don't know for sure, but we know that 133 of our people were taken. We know that 36 of them were killed, and we are working on the assumption to bring all of them home, all of them, whatever state they're in, to give their families closure, which will be bittersweet for some families here in Israel, and to get our people home. They need to come home right now. They are innocent, completely innocent. There's only one reason that they've been taken hostage. It's because this genocidal terror army, which believes in evil, they are an evil force. They've taken them hostage. We need to get them back. And if they don't come back diplomatically, then we will get them back militarily.